Woman, an in-depth exploration of the world of women today with Sandra Elkin.
Good evening and welcome to Woman. Tonight is the second part of our two-part series on sex bias in education. My guests are Andrea Ostrum. Andrea is a clinical psychologist. She's a parent of 3. She is also a member of the Sex Roles Committee at a small private school in Brooklyn. Andrea was one of the first parents to publicly express concern over sex bias at the school. Also with us is Barbara Rothberg. Barbara is a social worker and a parent. She's also a member of the Sex Roles Committee at the same school, and she is currently trying to adapt the non-sexist approach to the New York City school system. Welcome to both of you. When did you first become concerned about sex bias?
I was lucky enough to be introduced by a friend to a consciousness-raising group in the women's movement in 1969 when they were first starting. And it was a very mind-blowing experience for me. I began seeing the world in different ways. I began picking up on different things all around me. I began thinking of my own past and my own life in different ways. And I also began looking at my children in different ways. And I began seeing things in the way my children were acting at home, and hearing things in the stories that they brought home from school, and wondering to myself what was happening in the school where they were spending so much of their time every day, and what kind of damage was going to be done to them there.
What about you, Barbara?
Well, my children are younger than Andrea's, and I went into school as a feminist and was making many changes in my own life at the time, and had been in conscious raising groups and was determined to make some kind of impact in the school that my child was into.
Andrea, what were some of the things your children were saying to you about their experiences at the school?
Part of it was what I was hearing about the things they were doing. Actually, it was mostly my daughter, because at that time she was in kindergarten and the boys were younger at that point. It was the things that she was bringing home. She was bringing home paintings and drawings and very little woodworking, if any. It was that when I visited the classroom and I would see these very tall, elaborate buildings that had been built by little boys, and I would look around for what Eva had done, and I would find this little shaky building in the corner, when I knew that at the age of 3 she was building these beautiful buildings at home, and I began to be very concerned. It was the fact that she stopped being interested in building with blocks at home, whereas earlier this was something that she had done quite a bit of. It was hearing the kinds of things she was doing outdoors when they went outdoors to play. She and the other little girls would be playing house while the boys would be engaged in these active roughhousing games. And things like that began to get me very concerned. I also began reading up on the literature and on the research and reading what happens to girls as they go through the educational system, and reading things like intelligence scores and achievement scores rise steadily until high school, at which point they suddenly drop. Reading things like 2/3 of the girls tested do well in English and language arts and poorly in math, and only 1/3 do well in math and science. I began reading things that about all the feelings little girls grow up having about themselves in terms of their own inferiority feelings about themselves, and these things just began to get me very concerned.
And what happened next? Did you talk to other parents?
Not at first. At first I was very naive. I figured that since I was concerned about this, obviously everyone would be, and I raised it at an educational meeting of the parent body of the school, and I asked what differences they saw between the boys and girls, and I was told, well, we all know boys and girls are different. By the time the girls reach junior high, they're not interested in math and science anymore. And nobody was shocked, and nobody was upset. Nobody was angry. So I began realizing that there was nothing that I could do alone, and I began talking to some friends who also began to be concerned. And over the summer, 4 of us met and just shared our own experiences, our concerns about our children, and more or less came to a consensus that we wanted to do something, but that we would need more people. And we each agreed to call 1 or 2 friends, which was a natural thing to do because it's...
Barbara, were you there at that point?
No, my child was not in the school at that time.
The first real meeting we had was about 10 or 12 women the following fall, and we mostly discussed the experiences our children were having, the experiences that we had had as kids in school. It was a very intense, very personal kind of meeting where we all felt a great feeling of togetherness and a lot of cohesiveness. and a lot of feeling that we wanted to be able to make things different for our children than it had been for us.
What were some of the things you discussed?
Many of the things that I mentioned before. Everyone had one kind of story or another. One parent had been in the kindergarten class and had seen a woodworking shop. A little boy came up and hammered a nail in and it didn't go in straight, and the teacher said, "That's not good, try again." So he tried again, and the teacher said, "No, that's not good, try again, you've got to try until you get it right." And finally he got it right, and he walked away feeling very proud. And about 5 minutes later, a little girl walked up and hammered 2 nails in. They went in bent and crooked, and the teacher said, "Oh, well, they make a pretty design."
All this doesn't start in school, though. It starts sooner than that.
This all starts very, very early. Children are socialized into different roles from the very beginning. Little girls come home from the hospital in pink blankets, and little boys come home in blue blankets, and they're smiled at and talked to differently. You look at kids stand up on cribs. A little boy holds on to a crib, and he's told, "Look how strong you are, you're such a big boy." And a little girl holds on to a crib, and she says, "Look how cute she is, she's holding on to the crib." And these kinds of attitudes start very early, and as they go into school, they've already had these, they know these kinds of things, they know what they're expected to do. The girls know they're supposed to be quiet, they're supposed to be cleaner. The boys are allowed to be noisier, they're allowed to be rougher. They're the ones who get into the block one immediately, they're the ones who get the big blocks and they start building. I mean, we talk about why the girls and the boys have different ideas and why they're in the block one is playing with different things. The girls build the little short ranch houses practically because they get little 2-by-2 blocks because that's what's left over. The boys get in there first and they use the very big blocks, and the girls have to use what's left over, and they don't have a choice.
So you're saying they don't do it because they want to, they do it because they don't have any other blocks?
And sometimes they're intimidated by the noise. They don't know how to deal with the boys. They're taught to be quiet. They're taught to act differently. And they just get in there and they don't know how to handle it. They're not taught to be, it's an integrated group. And we bring them to school this way, and then the teachers see this, and the teachers having the very same attitudes that the parents have, which are just the attitudes of our sex as society. And they too reinforce these things. And if there's no awareness, we just keep perpetuating the system. And that's when the needs for these committees come up.
And it gets even more complicated because then teachers will say and feel things like, well, the children should be free to do what they want to do. But is there real freedom if children are channeled very early so that they're limited in what they can do? I mean, those little girls, when they go into the block corner, have already been socialized in a way that they cannot cope with the aggression of the boys. It frightens them. And they don't have the emotional tools to deal with it. So if
so instead they go into the doll corner and they play mommy, and they're busy ironing and they're taking care of babies and they're cooking. And if a little boy by any chance goes into the doll corner, he's daddy and he goes off to the office and he leaves.
Or else what they do is throw the dishes around and
Yes,
make lots of noise
and
make
very
a mess.
and be very obnoxious, just like men tend to be sometimes. Let's face it.
What happened with the parents after you had your first meeting?
We met several times together trying to increase our numbers and really talking about common concerns and talking very much about what we wanted for our children. And essentially there was common agreement that what we wanted was for our children to have as much freedom of choice as possible so that they could be as whole and complete people as possible. We met, I would say, half a dozen times, trying to be very precise and very unified about what we wanted, trying to define very clearly what our concerns were. And basically what we wanted to say to the school was, we want you to see this as a problem. Our boys and our girls are being channeled into different kinds of behavior and different kinds of activities, not on the basis of what they want to do, but because they're boys and girls. And we want you to recognize this as an educational problem and deal with it on a school-wide basis.
Andrea, how hard was it to get into the school in that way? Now, I'm working with public schools now. It's impossible to get into the schools. We're working very hard on getting parent groups together and being able to make some kind of impact on the administration and let them know it really is a problem. I think in the school we're dealing with, it was really, I wasn't there in the beginning, but I think now it's such a supportive system that it really was different.
Well, I think maybe you should discuss the problems, the differences.
Yeah.
It was very subtle. I mean, we were able to speak with the director of the school. We decided that what we would want to do would be to invite the director and assistant director to come to one of our meetings. And we were able to speak with her. And the first question she asked was, how many families do you represent? And without batting an eyelash, I said 30 families. She said, I'll be there. No, actually what she said was, I guess I have to listen to you.
Right.
Okay, so right away that tells us something, that there's strength in numbers.
Absolutely.
Now, this school happens to be a very small school. So 30 families is quite a large
sizable
segment
number.
of the school.
But that's not true in a New York City public school.
Nor are you going to get 30 families as easily in a New York City public school, which is the other thing, because in the school that we're dealing with here, which I also have a child at and I'm very familiar with now, there are parents supporting this. It is a feminist-oriented school. There are many women who are feminists and who are
But
active.
it couldn't have been feminist-oriented when you began.
It didn't start
It
out
wasn't
that way.
feminist-oriented, but the whole school policy is very much a liberal, progressive, experimental kind of school.
Which is also not really true.
Which is not the real-world environment. So I'm dealing with very different problems in the New York City system.
But you know, in some ways, the image of the school as a liberal, progressive school created problems of its own, because the staff had the attitude, who, us? I mean, we believe in freedom. We're very liberal, we're
Right,
very
which makes it
progressive.
even
We
harder.
would never channel children into anything. How can you accuse us?
Right.
And one of the big problems was that the school felt accused. And that was the biggest problem that we had to deal with in the beginning. It was easy to get the meeting with the director once we had 30 families. And of course, once everyone knew the director was coming, we easily had 30 families.
Right.
We then asked for a meeting with the full staff, at which a smaller group of us would present our concerns and what we wanted them to do.
Let's hold it right there and let Barbara...
Let's have a little
Right.
bit of what it's like to get into the public school
Okay.
system. We talked about decentralization earlier, and the whole problem with decentralization is that you have to deal with each individual school board by itself, and you can't have a dictum for the system in the same kind of way. Some school principals feel that they can do things in their school by themselves. Once or two schools have invited people to come down and speak at faculty meetings and are interested in the issue of sexism and are very open to it. Another school in a district that I'm working with, I thought might be receptive. I spoke to the principal and he said, of course you can come down to my school. I had worked up a questionnaire just to determine if there was sexism in the school, which I assumed there would be. And I try to work up a very non-threatening questionnaire dealing with classroom procedures, with questions somewhat like, how do you line the children up? Do you line them up according to sex groups or height, or just by random selection, let the kids just get into line? And questions of this sort in terms of seating, wardrobe assignments, if there were different activities or not. And it didn't seem to me like it was a very threatening kind of questionnaire.
I think it was probably pretty threatening.
I tried very hard not to make it threatening. Okay.
I think the problem is that institutions are really afraid of being scrutinized because nobody likes to be blamed.
All right, but this is the point. I think that's true. But this is the point. I went to the principal. He looked at it and he said, that sounds fine to me. I think our teachers would be willing to answer it. He didn't guarantee me 100% cooperation. I said, fine. He said, you just must get school district board approval. And that'll be no problem, call Mr. So-and-so. And I said, fine. I called Mr. So-and-so and told him that Mr. So-and-so, the principal, said, oh, fine, that's no problem. You tell him I said it's okay. I go back to the principal and he said, I need it in writing. I said, you didn't say that. I go back to the district office and the district office says to me, writing? Well, let me see that questionnaire again. The board has to review it now.
Barbara, they were all scared to death and none of them want to stick their necks out.
That's right. So I go back to the board and I give them the questionnaire. This was about 3 weeks ago. I have been working on this problem almost daily. It becomes routine. I go into the office and make a phone call, just to the district office. Hello, I'm still here waiting for my phone call. And I've gotten shunted around. I've been given the name of the head of the school board, the name of the superintendent. My name keeps popping up. They keep saying, we'll call you back, we'll get back on it. I have been given a total runaround, and they're afraid to let me into the school.
What do you intend to do with the questionnaire once you get it?
Once I get it, I will be able to have some data to say, yes, there is sexism in your school. You are discriminating against the boys and the girls by putting them in different groups. If you're lining your kids up separately, you have to be treating them differently.
You're going to go to the teachers with this information?
No, I'm not. I think that's something we talked about earlier, about how to work a whole coalition. I think let's hold off on that.
Let's hold off on that a second and get back to the meeting now.
You see, I think my feeling is I'm listening to what you're saying about the public schools and then thinking about what happened in this private school. And I'm thinking that just like people, all institutions are afraid to change.
Absolutely.
And that each institution will use whatever tools it has at hand to try to resist change, unless you somehow make them realize that it's worth their while to change. So
Yes.
the public school system has the advantage of the huge bureaucracy, and they can bounce everything around and pass
And they do
the
a
buck.
very good job.
They're experts at it. With the private school, it's a little bit different. The resistance was more subtle and on a more emotional level.
And you also have the power in that you're paying for school, and that the administration has a different kind of responsibility to parents in a private school.
I think it's true.
And a different kind of say.
I think it's true, and I think what that means is that they'll try to use much more subtle ways of resisting.
All right.
Okay.
Andrea, what happened?
What happened was we got our meeting with the full staff, and it was disaster. I mean, we went in there and we were prepared to present our case, and we were going to instantly convert everyone. And of course, we were sure they were going to be willing to work with us, and they were so threatened, and they felt so accused. They really felt as if we were coming in there and pointing a finger at them and saying, look what you're doing to our children.
In a sense, though, that's what was happening.
In a sense, that's what was happening, but I think that we made a mistake in polarizing it and seeing it as an us-them. I think we didn't acknowledge our responsibility and our part in the socialization process in terms of what happens with the children, and our acknowledgement that it's not easy to change it, that we were having trouble changing it, that we were struggling with it, and that we recognized that it was a big problem. They felt in a sense that we were coming in saying we had all the answers, now why didn't they shape up? And I think that that's very important in terms of organizing a group to avoid in dealing with teachers.
It's a very, very difficult thing to do, though, because we are going in as parents and saying to the teachers, we don't like what's happening in the school, and we want to change it. We want your help, we want your cooperation, and we want to form a coalition and do it together. But it's still very difficult. And even in this school, it took time to be able to get it together, where the parents and the teachers could work together to what we really have today.
Is it more difficult to involve parents in a public school situation?
In a public school, I think it's more difficult to get the initial in. I mean, you have PTA groups, and if you have parents getting themselves together in some kind of cohesive power unit and to go into the administration, they can get themselves in, but they don't have the same kind of responsibility to parents that a private school might. And I think it's more difficult in terms of time for meetings, and for teachers, they do not have to give the same kind of time. They do not have the same kind of responsibility and commitment in the same kind of way. So it really makes the problem even more mammoth.
I think there are other ways that you can get a school involved, perhaps, that might not be as threatening, because after our mistake, we really thought, okay, what can we do now?
Well, it's misleading, I think, because a lot of positive change was made and the group got together.
No, but when I'm saying the mistake, I mean the initial meeting with the staff,
okay,
where they were very, very threatened. And we thought, okay, what do we do now to get them involved? And one thing that we thought of was, let's help them to see what we're seeing in a less personal way. Let's move it outside the school for a minute. And what we did was, we asked time for a presentation, and we asked the Feminist Book Collective to come in and show a slideshow about children's readers and children's books. And that was so obvious that everyone who was there, teachers, other parents, ended up seeing exactly the same things that we saw. So right away their consciousness had begun to be raised without blaming themselves. And what we then did was, we went back to them and we said, look, we'd like to be able to talk with you more about these things. We're having problems with it. We'd like to be able to discuss it with you. And we set up small group meetings on a regular basis between parents and teachers, and we said anyone who would like to come. And then we tried to personalize our invitation, so we would go to teachers that we knew and say, we'd love to have you come. And we would have small group meetings, and they would talk about very specific topics. It was like focused consciousness raising. So one topic was, for instance, what are the perceived differences between boys and girls? And there was much more of a feeling of everybody talking together about a common problem.
I think the main point of being able to get teachers on your side and to deal with them together is most important in the public school system too. Because as a group of parents get together, you can get support by going to individual teachers you think might be with you. And before you present it to a faculty meeting or a PTA meeting, having support from the teachers and having ideas of what you want to do also is extremely helpful. And I think what you said about consciousness raising is really the basis, that it's got to be on a conscious raising level and have people aware of what the problems really are. I mean, that's the way I've been getting parent groups together now. Just like the group at this school got together, I've been speaking to women's centers and to women's groups and saying, what is happening to your children in school? Do the girls and boys that you have the same kind of treatment? And they all say to me, of course they do. There's no discrimination. There's a law. Everybody has the same thing. And then I said, how many of you have boys who are safety monitors? And a couple of women say, no, boys. A couple of women say, yeah, we do. And so how many girls are safety monitors? And there's none. And what are safety monitors? They stand in the corner, they wear those white straps. They're very important. They help other kids cross the streets. And they've got this tremendously status job. Girls never have these opportunities. And then the mothers say, we want our daughters to have those things too. Then you've got hall monitors. The girls are on hall monitors for the most part. They're beginning in some schools, but many schools, it's still boys are hall monitors. Then you have things like audio-visual monitors. They just turn that little button and they show films, and they go from class to class and push the machines around. And it's a fantastic thing. They get out of classes, and they love doing it. Girls don't do that. Boys wear cameras. Why can't girls do that? And that's where the parents say, yeah, we want our girls to do that too.
And I think two things happen when you do that. First of all, everyone cares about their kids.
Right.
Nobody wants to see their kids hurt. And once people begin to realize that children are really being damaged by this process, they begin to be concerned. But I think what also happens is that they begin to realize how they felt. That mother who is thinking that her daughter is not a safety monitor perhaps remembers how she felt when she wanted that badge desperately and couldn't get it.
Right.
A thing that I'd like you to address yourselves to, the response from the teachers. Their specific problems and perhaps some of the ways in which they, weren't responsive.
Well,
I think one of the problems for teachers is, firstly, how much should they do? There is a responsibility involved in being an educator, and you have girls and boys, and it's almost irrelevant. You're talking about individuals, and they're talking on a whole theoretical basis. We are here to educate our children. Do I have the right to say to a kid, you must do that? And this has been a big debate that we've been having with the parent groups, the teacher groups that we're running now. We're on to the next stage where we really sit and discuss problems. And that's been a major concern. One teacher came to us and said, the kids sit down at lunch wherever they want. The girls sit at one table and the boys sit at the other. Should I integrate the tables?
What did you say to her?
We'll throw it around. That's the purpose of our group now. We just threw it around and said, should you? I don't know. Some people said yes and some said no. This teacher decided that it was imperative the girls and boys had contact at this time. It was her feeling that this should be imposed. So she said there must be the same amount of girls and boys at each table. And this was her rule. Other teachers might not feel comfortable with it.
we also found there was a difference in the ages of the children. And
Well, I think, let me just finish my point. My point is that every teacher really has to deal with what he or she is comfortable with, and the solutions are just enormous. I mean, we have a choice just like to do anything we want, and the idea now is to be able to throw things around and to see the best way to handle situations and have people share with each other in a consciousness-raising way to see how things are handled, what is the best way to handle them, and then learn from each other. This is the whole group process that we're really talking about.
And that some things that work with one age won't work with another age.
Right.
So that you can interfere and tell children in first and second grade, no, you have to have an equal number of boys and girls. And that worked out very well. I mean, inside of a few weeks, the boys and girls were communicating with each other in a much more open, natural way. But when they tried to do that with 7th and 8th graders, it didn't work at all.
Well, they resented greatly. You can't tell me what to do. And
Well,
that's
and
got to
they're
be
also-
respected as an individual child, too, in terms of their growth and independence, that you cannot impose everything on them, and they have the right to have their friends and to sit with whomever they want.
So mostly you're talking about things at the elementary level, right? It's a really different story in high school and junior high.
It's much more problematic in high school and junior high because when you're dealing with kids that are into puberty and into beginning to relate to their own bodies and to themselves and boys and girls in a very kind of loaded way, it becomes very tricky. We tried to show the film on sex bias in books to the 7th and 8th graders, and the minute they saw the word sex in the title, they dissolved into giggles, and that was it. They really didn't hear the rest of the show.
Right, I think we're talking about two different issues here in terms of junior high schools and high schools and elementary schools. One is the children themselves, and one is what can parents do in the schools.
Let's talk about that. We don't have a lot of time, but
Okay. In terms of parents in elementary school, I think we're really addressing ourselves to this experimental school and the work I'm doing now really with elementary school levels. I think the most important thing to do first is to be able to find people who are interested and who are somewhat aware of the problem. And then, as Andrea mentioned earlier, get some kind of group cohesiveness as a power base. So they can go with their ideas as a unit with strength to the administration and say, we want to work with you. We have some difficulties. You have some difficulties. We have to have a coalition of people together and find out what the problems really are and to alleviate them to working together. The next thing is really what to do about it. And then we can give them some concrete suggestions in terms of conscious raising for the teachers and in terms of curriculum ideas for the children to work with.
We've talked about the parents' response, the teacher's response, just a little bit about the children's response. You did some consciousness raising
I did
with
conscious
them.
raising with 8th graders, which Andrea mentioned before, the difference, which was interesting. I started out having the boys and girls together in one group, and it was absolutely impossible. The boys laughed, there was competition, there was power struggles, the girls could not talk comfortably in front of them. They were adolescent kids, they were interested in how they looked, they were interested in 17 magazine, and I had an absolutely impossible time with them.
Andrea, what about the littler kids?
Well, what I'm finding with the littler kids is that they're more aware, and they know what we want to hear, and they can look at television shows and books and commercials, and they can tell us everything that's wrong with them.
Are they giving it to you because they know you want to hear it?
I think that's part of it, but I think part of it is that they're really hearing it, and they're really seeing it, and they're really seeing that it's a very limiting thing. I think where it gets to be much more difficult to induce change is when you get down to their interaction with each other. Because as much as they can look at a commercial and say it's very silly that the women are passive and dusting and cleaning house and the men are these super aggressive superheroes, when they get out into the yard, the boys still want to hog the big yard and the girls still have trouble breaking in. And it takes a lot of real compensatory work on the part of the teachers and on the part of the parents to help both groups, to help the boys calm down and give more room, and to help the girls become more assertive and reach out for what they want and get it and learn how to effectively develop the skills that they've really been crippled in developing. It can't just happen if they're left alone. It will never happen.
I think one of the ways to bridge
We
the
have
gap...
1 minute.
Okay, quickly. One of the ways to bridge the gap, I talk fast,
No, you don't
is
do that.
is to talk about fairness with the children and to let them realize that it isn't fair, and the boys will really be receptive to that. I found that with 3rd and 4th grade kids, that the boys are receptive to saying it isn't fair that they're having this situation. It isn't fair that the girls are always in the small yard, even though we want it. No, the fairness is well, I think it's a part of the thing. They allow it to come through with the kids that I've worked through with.
But I think you still have to have an adult who's aware and
Oh,
who can set
absolutely.
limits and
Absolutely.
say it cannot be this way.
Yes, but you also want the change to be internalized and not just
Right.
imposed by the teacher.
Right. And that's the problem we're all struggling with.
Yes.
How to do it.
Yes. It's a process.
In one word, is there a set of rules that people can follow, or do you have to design it for your own situation?
I think that there are 3 guiding principles. Get yourself a group, be cohesive, approach the school from a position of strength, and then work like hell.
Thank you very much. I'm sorry we're out of time. Thank you for watching. Good night. See you next week.